Have you noticed that just even the mention of Alexander Isak leaving sparks an absolute chaotic mess from Tyneside? This is the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and indeed making this a part of your morning routines. Very much appreciate your being here. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Good morning to those joining us live in the chats. Jamil, Knowledge, Amira, Paul. We've got Arasilki and Ken and Black Shine and Kim and Paul. Rowan and Carlton and Dellen, Grantley Poos, Hooded Gooner, Barry, Paul Jr., Shari. Morsika, we got Huey, we got Gooner 76, Mike, Matt G, plenty more. As usual, familiar faces as well in the chat. Great to see so many of you here. Thank you for that. We'll, of course, be tackling plenty of your comments and thoughts in part 2 of the show. And if those have already been a little bit eagle-eyed, have spotted, there is a poll for you to vote on as well this morning. One of the 3 potential candidates. Just these 3 today. I know that some of you may have wanted to vote on a different type of player or a different name, but we are talking about the 3, what are considered to be the 3 kind of key candidates for Arsenal in the summer in terms of strikers. Who would you sign? And you obviously got to try and factor in and condition in that price tag and also what that might mean for the rest of Arsenal's summer. Are you willing to take a risk on a big, more expensive player? Or are you indeed looking at things more broadly and looking at what impact that might have on other business? You could choose between Alexander Isak, Viktor Gyokeres, and Benjamin Sesko. So keep voting on that poll. We'll talk about that a bit more later on. But good morning to you all. Please make sure you drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Alexander Aluko in the chat saying, good morning, Tom. My first time joining a live show. See, after all these years of doing this show, we're still getting newbies into the chat box. It's brilliant. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for so much, as always, for tuning in. Let's jump, though, shall we? We jump to our stories for today. Not much to discuss, unsurprisingly so, during this international break. But Jorginho was kind of the story of yesterday, spotted in Brazil, particularly over a move to Flamengo. There's been a lot of suggestions, of course, that Flamengo remain a side very interested in Jorginho. There have been suggestions that he'd already signed a pre-contract agreement with the Brazilian club, although that's not been officially confirmed as of yet. There's been further suggestions, of course, that it may benefit Jorginho to wait until the end of the season before, of course, then leaving at the end of his contract before signing on with any potential club. That could be another reason why Jonathan David, for instance, as another example, has not signed a pre-contract agreement with any club so far. But he is in Brazil, was spotted there. When asked by those that had indeed spotted him while he was there, he just said, I'm on vacation. It's a complete coincidence that he happens to be in the place where the club that's been most notably interested in him is where he happens to be. But I don't think he's fooling anybody there. But we moved to kind of the main bulk of today's show already, which is around this striker position. Now, yesterday I wrote an article basically around the 3 potential forwards that Arsenal could sign. You can go and read that piece on the football.london website. I'll leave a link to that piece, not only in today's live chat, but also in today's video description as well. Go give it a read. It kind of breaks down all 3 strikers, the pros, the cons, and all the considerations that need to be made when thinking about each of the 3 options, which, as we've mentioned before, Alexander Isak, Benjamin Sesko, Viktor Gyokeres, they are the choices. It talks about the price tags. It talks about injury records. It talks about the goal tallies. It talks about the context of the leagues that they're playing in. And I thought today that we would have a bit of a conversation around the striker summer kind of whole conundrum and how we sort this out. So, yes, you got Alexander Isak, first of all, arguably the most high-profile and anticipated player of the summer window, I think, in terms of like the saga that we could expect. He scored in that League Cup final against Liverpool, which is his 23rd goal of the season in 33 matches, which he also has added 5 assists to that tally as well. So 28 goal contributions in 33 games. He's still only 25 years of age, and he's approaching, of course, the best years of his career. However, of the 3, he is the most expensive. There are suggestions that Newcastle will be looking for a fee in the region, perhaps even more than £130 million for Alexander Isak to leave Tyneside. The issue that we've got, of course, with Alexander Isak is his injury record. I did an entire dedicated piece as well, which is linked into that article that I've linked in the description, about the injury records that Alexander Isak has dealt with. This season alone, he's missed 9 games for both Newcastle and Sweden, while in total since his move to England, he's missed 39 matches across 206 days of absence with 6 separate issues. There were 7 more injury-related absences during his time with Real Sociedad and Borussia Dortmund. And I think this is what could stop the club in its tracks when it comes to making such a significant financial commitment to Isak. It's like, yes, he's the most expensive. Yes, he's probably the best of the 3 to buy just on player quality and transition to the Premier League. But ultimately, his injury record with multiple clubs is far worse than that of the other 2 players, of course, that we are discussing today. Then you've got Benjamin Sesko, a player that we know Arsenal have been very interested in before. They made an approach for him last summer, of course, but he decided to stay with Leipzig for at least another season while guarantees over starting at Arsenal were not at that time guaranteed, with Kai Havertz, of course, there. But I think that situation has now moved on. He scored 17 goals across all competitions in 36 matches. He's also added 6 assists to that tally, so 23 goal contributions in 36 games in the Bundesliga for an RB Leipzig side, of course, who rank incredibly low in terms of creativity. So they have not been creating too much, meaning that it does add that extra bit of context to his goal tally, that he's still scoring plenty of goals at the age of 21, which is another key factor, despite the fact that he plays for a Leipzig side that are incredibly poor when it comes to shot creativity. And he's creating a lot of opportunities to himself. He's also scored in plenty of big games, like Isak has. He scored against Bayern Munich. He scored against Juve. He scored twice against Atletico Madrid. He scored against Borussia Dortmund. He's the tallest, of course, of the 3 as well. And it is well known that Arsenal have an interest in the player. And at £66 million, that's the suggested gentleman's clause that it would take for a club to secure his signature at the very minimum. He is the cheapest of all 3. In fact, he could end up costing half of what Alexander Isak could cost. And of course, has 4 years on the Swedish striker as well. Lastly, is another Swedish striker. Of course, that is Viktor Gyokeres. His price tag is €100 million, which is the release clause, £84 million. This season, he has scored 40 goals in 41 games across all competitions and added 10 assists to that. So 51 goal contributions in 40 games. This follows on from his 43 goals in 50 games last season with 15 assists on top of that. He is on track to beat that record that he set so famously during the previous season. The caveat, of course, with Viktor Gyokeres is that he is playing in the most impressive, quality-driven, dominant side in the Portuguese league against sides that ultimately would probably not be getting into even the second tier of either of the German or the English leagues, where both Isak and Sesko play for a lot of those teams in the bottom half of the Portuguese league, who he is scoring on a regular basis. To caveat that, he did get 22 goals, of course, in the Championship while playing for Coventry 2 seasons ago. And at £84 million represents, of course, still a financial gulf between him and what it would cost to sign Alexander Isak. However, he is also the oldest of the 3 and will be turning 27 going into next season as well. So there are your 3 options. Your poll is in the chat box. We're going to be taking more discussions and arguments and points and getting some of your feelings around these 3 in part 2. But just before we hop there, I do want to briefly discuss what some of the social side of the elements is around Alexander Isak online, particularly from Tyneside. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but I cannot help but feel that if you ever dare to discuss the idea of Alexander Isak leaving Newcastle, you are met with a barrage of kind of clapback from anyone of not even sometimes Newcastle persuasion. But I've never quite known anyone to be as, I don't know if insecure is the word, but I'd be fair to say that they are losing their minds at times when you see any suggestions, any articles come out, any news stories come out. I remember listening to that TalkSport episode where I think it was Darren Bent was discussing with a Newcastle fan on the phone about the idea that, PSR reasons might force Newcastle to sell. And this Newcastle fan nearly lost their minds, almost in tears at the idea of Alexander Isak leaving, and that they were fighting, tooth and nail to try and convince everyone listening that that isn't the case. But it is a very odd one. I get that you don't want to see your best players leave. I know the Arsenal fans would be very annoyed if we lost William Saliba to Real Madrid, for instance, but I have never known I get comments on videos whenever I include Alexander Isak in a thumbnail or in a video. Newcastle fans suddenly scouring the internet, it seems, for anybody outside of their own kind of little bubble talking about Isak leaving. The reality is, of course, he's not committed his future to the club. He has not yet signed that brand new contract, despite all of the suggestions that he would indeed sign that contract. He has recently done an interview during this international break, while, of course, away with Sweden. Speaking to Football Scannerland, he said, "There's not much to say, really. I've commented on my situation and my security in Newcastle several times. It's been written how much I love the city and the club, how well I feel there. I'm not thinking about the future. I just want to perform for Newcastle. Now we won the cup, but we want to finish strong and reach the Champions League games. That's where my focus lies. There's no reason for me to think about anything else other than Newcastle. I'm enjoying myself incredibly well at Newcastle. The only focus I have is on playing." This is your classic, I'm not going to say anything that doesn't rule out a move, but ultimately tries to keep the fans happy at the same time. Those are quotes of a player that is leaving their future very much open-ended. If indeed he was happy at Newcastle and was committed to Newcastle, we all know that he would have signed a brand new contract by this point. We all know that he would have come out and said that he is not going to be leaving in the summer. That has not happened. That is not what he has said. And I think we all know what that ultimately means. Right, we're going to go to part two now. We're going to get some of your thoughts on this debate, on your thoughts, on your feelings and opinions about the three options that Arsenal potentially could look to in the summer, and maybe some other names if indeed you want to throw them into the ring, right after this. Okay, this is part two of the show where we go into the chat box and we tackle plenty of your questions and more. So now is the time. We'll do a quick update now at this point on our poll. More than 400 of you have voted already on this poll, which sees the majority of you so far voting for, pause for dramatic effect for our audio catch-up listeners, Benjamin Sesko. 51% of the poll currently on the £60 million rough estimate around Benjamin Sesko. Following him is Alexander Isak on 30% of the vote. And then Viktor Gyokeres bringing up the rear are 19% of the vote so far. We'll see if that vote changes over the course of today's episode as more comments and opinions come in. We'll see if that vote changes as well. Stu says there's been over 400 likes, but there's only, there's been 400 votes, but there's only 150 likes. It begs the question, if you can press a button on a poll, what's stopping you from pressing the thumbs up button? I'd love for you to know and tell me why indeed you can press the poll but not the thumbs up button. That's what Stu wants to know. Frankly, that's what I want to know. Make sure you've dropped a like if you haven't done so already. Let's scroll up in the chat, because I imagine there was quite a lot of conversation going on while we were going through part one as well. And specifically, we're trying to keep the conversation to these three. Harj says, I reckon we get Sesko and then spend the additional money that we would have spent on Isak, maybe on an attacking midfielder. Andrew says, why do I feel like Liverpool are going to offload Darwin Nunez to us and then Liverpool sign Isak? Goodness me, that would be an awful scenario, would it not? SCT Lala says, watching on catch up, but I'd definitely say Sesko, as I think we need more than just the striker. Plus, he could turn into the next big thing. I mean, he's already producing some pretty big things already as well. Jackson says, Sesko has 10 goals in the league in 25 appearances. May as well keep Kai as the striker. Of course, it's worth pointing out, again, as we talked about, that RB Leipzig this season creatively rank as one of the worst teams in the Bundesliga. So the goals that he is getting, of course, are that of a player that is currently playing under a lot more creative droughts than what, of course, Kai Havertz is operating with in the Premier League. That's 10 goals and 5 assists in the Bundesliga so far, 15 goal contributions in 25 league games for Sesko. But add that to the other competitions, as we mentioned already, and that's 17 goals and 6 assists across all comps, because he's scoring 4 goals in 8 Champions League games. That goes against some of the big teams in that competition as well, as we have already mentioned. Tom says, I understand the Sesko deal money-wise, but I feel it would be a huge statement signing Isak, that we want to push for the league. He's the best, and we do have Kai as backup should he get injured. Blood Clark says, let's be fair, Isak's numbers weren't all that before joining Newcastle. I think Sesko becomes a £150 million player with us. This is a really good point, actually, and something that maybe isn't discussed as much. Like, we talk about the numbers of players like Sesko, for instance, while he's at RB Leipzig. But if you have a quick look at the numbers of Isak while he was playing for Real Sociedad, for instance, in that sense, you kind of get some similar numbers. I mean, we'll just have a quick look at the career statistics of Isak. So in his last full season with Real Sociedad, he scored 10 goals, the same number of goals that Isak, the same number of goals that Sesko currently has, with the season still not finished, with RB Leipzig. In 2021, he got 17 goals in 44 matches across all competitions. By the way, that 10 goals was across all comps. He actually scored 6 goals in 32 La Liga games. He scored 17 goals in 34 La Liga games in 2021, and he scored 9 La Liga goals in 37 La Liga games across 1920. So, yeah, let's not pretend that Isak was not putting in similar numbers to Sesko playing in La Liga, and it wasn't until he moved to Newcastle that we've started to see these numbers increase significantly. 10 goals in his first 27 games for Newcastle in 22-23, 25 goals last season in 40 matches across all comps, and then, of course, this season, as we've mentioned already, 23 goals in 33 games across all competitions. So, yeah, that's certainly worth thinking about in terms of what was being displayed by Alexander Isak. And Jack says Isak played left wing at Sociedad. Well, Jack, I'm quickly looking at 1920. He played 44 games at striker. So I'm not sure, Jack, that that is entirely accurate. That's just 1920. If we go to 2021, he played 44 games at striker. Shall we go to 21-22? Maybe this is where Jack gets some reprieve or respite. Yes, he does. He played a grand total of 1 game at left wing for Real Sociedad in 21-22. 34 matches played at centre forward. So it's all well and good saying things that aren't true, but when they're scrutinised, it turns out that they're not the case. Ruben says, do you not think the price of Isak will go down if Isak tried to force a move through Arteta convincing him, or they miss out on the Champions League? Find it hard to believe he will ever go for such a price. And I guess that's what, they are hoping for. I guess that's what Newcastle are going to suggest, is that we have him under contract, and quite a long contract to that, I think till 2028. They have got all of the balls in their court. But if Isak was to try and force a move out of Newcastle, which, to be honest, I'm not sure whether I see that happening. But I do think you'll start to see some bids in the summer that try and unsettle him, turn his head. So let's wait and see if that turns out to be the case. Ryan says, Tom, Isak is Premier League proven. Which Premier League clubs do you think will be battling with for Isak? I think Liverpool will definitely be there. I think that's got to be considered. I think Bayern Munich could be looked at as well. Bayern Munich, of course, with Harry Kane maybe leaving at some point in the near future. He's not getting any younger as Harry Kane, so maybe we'll be looking at some of those other clubs looking at Isak as well. I think Barcelona, you can never rule out them being absolutely mad to go and spend big money on a player, even with their own financial difficulties. So don't consider that to be just all cut and dry either. Ruben says, do you think the price... Oh, sorry, we've done that one. Ansa says, more inclined to go for Hugo Ekitike at this point, very similar to Isak in style and is producing better numbers than Isak was at 22. James says, Isak makes sense with Zubimendi as he progresses the ball so quickly, and Isak thrives on that quick service. Jamsey says, wouldn't mind if Isak stayed, but if he signs for a title rival and got them over the line when Arsenal have seemingly gone for the cheaper option, I think the public outcry would be potentially toxic. I don't know if it's saying about going for the cheaper option. It depends on if even they can go for Isak. We don't know if even Arsenal are able to spend £130 million plus on one player. That is quite the investment, of course, on a single player. And they've got other needs in that window beyond just centre forward that they absolutely need to address. the winger position. I think an attacking midfielder is still needed. I think obviously the defensive midfield side of things with Zubimendi. We're seeing a lot of players leaving defence, which means a defender's probably needed, a backup goalkeeper. All of these things are definitely still things that we need. People are saying that they want to see Arsenal sign 5 or 6 players in the window. Is that possible if you sign Alexander Isak? I don't know. Soitan says, do you think that Arsenal will really blow the bank for Isak? I don't think so. I might, if I'm thinking about this, just not what I want. I obviously don't think they will. If I'm choosing a striker, Alexander Isak is who I would like, without question. I think if Arsenal were to sign Alexander Isak, it would turn them into a title winner. I think it could win Arsenal a title, but it is also a risk. I'm saying that on the preface that he stays fit. I'm saying that on the preface that we can still get other business done. If I'm told that signing Alexander Isak means that you can sign just Zubimendi in the summer on top of that, I'm probably more inclined to go and sign another player because I know that we need a wide player as well. Do I think that Arsenal would score more goals if you signed Isak and Williams? Sorry, if we signed Sesko and Williams or just Isak? I guess that's an interesting question for you. Do you think that the volume of goals in the team overall would increase more if we signed Isak or if we signed Sesko and Williams? I guess that's an interesting question to ask yourselves. Do you think that overall the team's goals would increase more under Isak or under Sesko and Williams? That's the question. Consider Williams this season has got a significant number of assists, of course, for Athletic, and last season has got even more. He's really having a much stronger resurgence in the second half of the season. He's got 16 goal contributions, does Nico Williams this season, despite it being not as good as it was last season. And last season, he got 24 goal contributions, 16 assists across all comps. So it's an interesting idea to think about it in that way. Rowan says, to everyone who says sign Isak, just Isak, what happens if he gets injured? I think we're far better off signing Sesko and someone like a Jonathan David on a free. Mitch says Sesko, Nico, Zubi, and sign a Kimmich. And I think Kimmich has already signed a new contract, Mitch, so that's sadly not going to happen. Plus a young goalkeeper and a defender. Do you think this would be a reasonable and achievable summer? I think Sesko, Nico Williams, and Mendy, a free on Jonathan David, maybe another defender, a backup goalkeeper. That's definitely, I think, a realistic summer for Arsenal, 100%. But if it was Isak instead of, say, Sesko, suddenly that changes things, I think, quite dramatically. Patrick says, we need more creators more than finishers. Our attack is so rigid and predictable. Michael says, and that's assuming that we can convert those chances to goals when we have struggled at times. Interesting question and topic on this. Jamsey says, wholeheartedly agree with you, but with the press pushing the number one target story so much, fans have been led to believe that this is a realistic possibility despite the other connotations. Well, who do you blame there? Media, fans, what do we go for? I think I can see where that's going. Edward says, with Chelsea adding yet more players to their talent trafficking ring, we should be looking to take advantage of the ones that will fall by the wayside, like Kai, Andre Santos, not that one, the young midfielder, Brazilian, of course, youngster. Is he going to fall by the wayside as they sign more players? I have to say that if I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be absolutely fuming. I'll be fuming with the way they're doing business. They've already invested, close to 50 to 60 million pounds on 2 youngsters from Sporting. I mean, really? They could prove me wrong, but you've already spent 60 odd million quid before the summer's even started. None of that's gone on a new goalkeeper. None of that's gone on a centre forward. We all know they're the 2 positions that they desperately have to try and sign somebody in. It would be maddening if I was a Chelsea fan. Absolutely maddening. Now, Oliver says we need to score 1.5, 2 goals every game, but I think that we would probably score just a few more with Isak, but scoring more with Nico and Sesko. Big Smoke says only closeted Spurs fans don't like it. Cross Jonky says at the end of the day, get the sporting director in place, identify and act on the targets quickly and get it done earlier than leaving it to the last minute. And this obviously turns into a conversation about Andrea Berta. The interesting point about this is that when it comes to the striker, we don't need a sporting director to identify our striker. You don't need a sporting director, whoever it is, to do that. I know, we all know who the top strikers are currently on the market for the summer or potentially on the market for the summer. We all know who they are. You don't need a genius to work out who the best strikers are on the market. It doesn't take us appointing Andrea Berta over Thomas Rosicky or whoever to identify the best striker on the market. We all know who they are, So it's going to be about whether or not that sporting director can get the deal done, can negotiate, of course, the best price for Arsenal, and of course can negotiate a price that we can ultimately pay. Gooner Oz says, I honestly don't think that Isak is going to be sold in the summer. Fuad says, when is the Alberto announcement happening, Tom? Surely it'll be this week. It should be soon. Certainly the expectation, the feeling is that it will be soon, but, who knows? Who knows? Tyser says, do you worry that not signing anyone in January has now put us in the market with City, Liverpool, Chelsea, and Man United all looking for attacking players and midfielders this summer, which could cost us? I don't think that there was an attacking player in January, realistically, that Arsenal were going to be looking at. The only major player that really moved was Kvaratskhelia, who ultimately wasn't solving Arsenal's striker problems during that window and isn't actually getting in too much over Barcola at the moment at PSG, ironically, either. Sean says, Garcia, Hato, Zubamendi, Nipan, Nico Williams and Isak, 300 million summer, which would be happy with that. Just trying to work out. Yeah, I think that the answer to that is good luck getting all them in for 300 million, Sean, would be my answer to that. 21 Ramage says Gyokeres is the best option. Look at his numbers for Sweden compared to Isak. It's not even close. And to save 50 million for another position, no brainer. To be fair, while of course Isak didn't play left wing for club, I'm pretty sure that he plays the majority of games off the wing for Sweden. I could be wrong, but and I might be wrong, but I thought he played quite a lot of games in kind of playing off of Gyokeres. Like Gyokeres is the more central figure, and then Isak kind of plays off of him. You may not see it in terms of positionally on like a bit of paper, but when he plays, I think Gyokeres tends to be the more central figure. So I guess that's maybe an answer as to that. Kirill says yes. So Kirill must be right. Jamsy says, may just be me, but do you feel that signing Berta has somehow increased the selling value of some of our players? Something tells me that he gets 10 to 20 million more in negotiations. Yes. I think 10 to 20 million is quite the ambitious claim. I can't suddenly think that all of a sudden we're going to get 30 million for Fabio Vieira or 30 million for Kivior. But who knows? Maybe I'll end up being proven wrong. I think he's going to be hopefully better at selling than Edu was, but we will have to wait and see. Carl says, what if Sesko has a higher ceiling than Isak and he's half the price? We don't know. That's the risk with Sesko, isn't it? The risk is that you're investing a less amount of money in a younger player that might have a bigger ceiling than what we're seeing with Isak, but we don't know if that's the reality. Rasmus Højlund, of course, was thought of as a player with an incredibly high ceiling at Atalanta, but he's moved to Man United and that's not been realised. But I think that's probably got a lot more to do with Man United than it does Rasmus Højlund. Stephen says, Tom, how much do you feel players leaving even on a free will help with cash flow and potential salaries? Partey, Jorginho, Tierney, these are all players who are on significant wages that are going to be moving on, and that being moved off the wage bill will definitely be freeing up a lot of space for Arsenal to invest. Stephen says it'll either be Chelsea or Newcastle who miss out on the Champions League for next season. City have a favourable fixture list, so they'll be okay. Abdul says Arsenal going to win the Premier League and the Champions League this season. Arsenal going to buy Isak, Yamal, Musiala, Mbappe, and Sesko. Abdul, give me some of what you are having, mate. James says Isak is a focal point striker like an Henry. Sesko is more of a Giroud. How do you see each player sitting? That's an interesting point, James, because I don't look at Sesko like Giroud at all. He's very, very different in style. Giroud was much more of a target man than what Sesko is. Sesko is far more technically adept than what Giroud was. I think there's always this misconception that if you're really tall, you must be like Olivier Giroud. That's not the reality. Sesko has got power and speed in his game and drives with the ball and can take players on and beat his man. Giroud never really was that. Giroud was quite cumbersome and slow. So, no, I think maybe, and I say this with respect, James, but I think that's a lazy assumption that just because Sesko is a tall player like, Giroud was, that he isn't, that he plays in a similar style. He doesn't. He doesn't play like Giroud at all. He's very, very more direct, much more direct than what Giroud was. Jamil says, do you think that with Berta joining, we may for once do a large chunk of our summer business early this year? We always seem to drag out our signs until the end of the window. I think it's a bit of a misconception about Arsenal's transfers. I mean, do we have some players that sign towards the end of windows? Yeah, Absolutely. So does a lot of clubs. But actually, Arsenal do a lot of business pretty early on during windows. Calafiori came in pretty early during that season. He came in, I think, during the summer tour. Was signed while we were out in the United States last season. If you go back to 2023, Declan Rice came in before we went on the summer tour. Kai Havertz came in just before we went to Nuremberg, I think it was, because he played in that friendly. Jurrien Timber was signed even before that, I believe. Or maybe slightly after Havertz, actually, but certainly before the tour started. If you go back to the summer of 22-23, Gabriel Jesus, Fabio Vieira, I think both signed before the tour. Zinchenko signed while we were on the tour. Go back to 21-22, Ben White, I think, was signed pretty early on. I know Ramsdale and Odegaard and Tomiyasu were later in the window, but Lokonga and Tavares were signed earlier on in the window. And in 2021, Gabriel was signed early on in that window. Partey was deadline day. So I think there's a bit of a misconception, around how Arsenal always wait till the end of the window to do their business. The reality is that actually Arsenal do their business and a range of times. Some of it does go on a bit. The Mikel Merino thing last summer dragged on quite a while, but the Calafiori thing, I think he did play in pre-season. Obviously, he did have an injury, which meant his fitness-wise was... although maybe he did miss the Emirates game because I think he had a bit of a fitness issue, to be fair, in the summer. So there is definitely a misconception around Arsenal dragging out transfers. They don't always do it. They actually sign plenty of players quite early on, but because there's a few that do take a bit longer, there's kind of this misconception that Arsenal will always take ages to get players through the door. Floyd says, the only problem I have with signing Sesko, Tom, is that he's still young and will be new to the league. He may well need a season to bed into the club and into the league. I don't think the club has that luxury. Again, this is part of the risk associated with that transfer, isn't it? But the reality is that there aren't really any other centre forwards in the Premier League other than Isak that I'd be comfortable investing big money in. I'm just not sure that realistically Arsenal are going to be able to sign anyone other than Isak that is able to do that. You go down the league, Nottingham Forest aren't possessing a centre forward that are going to do that for us. We're not going to sign Chris Wood or Awoniyi. Brighton, they've got a fair few forwards, but I don't think any of them are game changers for us. Raul Pedro, Jorginho Ruta, Danny Welbeck. I mean, amazing what Danny Welbeck's done at Brighton, to be fair to him. Fulham, you've got... who is it? Muniz has not had the same season he did have last season, and Raul Jimenez is a little bit too old, I think, for us to be thinking about signing him. Aston Villa, Ollie Watkins, we've been there. He's 29-year-old. Not sure that's the right pathway for us. Bournemouth, I have been quite impressed with Evan-Nilsson, to be fair. Evan-Nilsson has had a good season, but again, I'm not sure he's the guy that I think Arsenal should be investing big money in to be their new centre forward. Brentford, and Mbeumo is more of a wide right forward than he is, a centre forward. And Wissa, I think Wissa is one of the most underrated players in the Premier League, to be fair. But again, he's not the guy that changes us. Mateta at Palace, again, I think it's a guy that works at Palace, but nowhere else. Then we get down to 13th place in Manchester United and 14th place in Tottenham, Everton, West Ham, Wolves, Ipswich, Leicester, and Southampton. That's the problem that we've got, is this idea. Cunha, I can see a lot of people saying in the chat box, Cunha is for me more of a guy that plays off of a central striker, plays off of a Strand Larson, not necessarily the guy that is the centre forward, but certainly still think he's potentially a player that could come in alongside Arsenal signing a centre forward during this window. I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't rule the idea of Matheus Cunha coming in. I know Andrea Berta was, of course, heavily involved in his move from Hertha Berlin to Atletico Madrid all those years ago. So Berta is definitely going to be very much, familiar with him and could, of course, help sign Cunha in the upcoming summer window, which I now see a lot of you in the chat box are also, of course, saying as well. Oliver says, perhaps a cheapish experienced striker alongside a Sesko would help with any potential injuries or inconsistency. Wouldn't Havertz fulfill that role, though, Oliver? You could argue. Probably he would. Oslo says, we've been missing out on our number one target for many transfer windows now. I hope that we get this done. Again, if we go back over the last transfer windows, Calafiori was a priority target and we got him. Merino was a priority target. We got him. Declan Rice was a priority target. We got him. Jurrien Timber was a priority target. We got him. Gabriel Jesus was a priority target. We got him. Ben White, priority target. Got him. Odegaard, priority target. Got him. Ramsdale, priority goalkeeper target. Got him. Thomas Partey was a priority midfield target alongside Houssem Aouar, but both of them were very much liked. Got him. Gabriel, priority target, got him. Yes, there's players that we haven't. We haven't got Rafinha. We didn't get Lisandro Martinez. We didn't get, I'm sure there's others, Mihajlo Mudryk. We didn't get Moises Caicedo. There are number one targets that we have missed out on. But again, similar to this whole we take too long to do business, there is a bit of a misconception there. Sahil says Merino was a primary. Yes, Merino was a primary target. That was a player that Arteta identified as being somebody that would replace Granit Xhaka ultimately in the squad. I think I looked at that and thought, that's the left-footed box-to-box midfielder. That's the left-footed left eight that you're looking at and going, that's who he thinks is going to replace him. Now, he's not really been that good enough for me to be considered a success yet. There's still a lot more time, I think, to come for Mika Merino, and obviously he's had to play in positions out of what he would usually be comfortable with. But he was a primary target for Arsenal. So was Calafiori. Elliot says Calafiori backup dancer. Incredibly disrespectful for Calafiori. The guy's younger than Bukayo Saka. So very, very disrespectful, I think, indeed. Curry says, I know we need other pieces of the puzzle, but I think we only have one main piece left. The striker. I'd go all out for Isak personally, if that is who Mikel Arteta ultimately wants. I really don't think that that is the only main piece. I think we need that left-sided player. I think we need another attacking midfielder. I think we need another defender. And I think obviously that backup goalkeeper is very important too. So I think there are other main pieces that are still needed during this window. It's without a doubt the most important piece is the centre forward. Don't get me wrong. Outside of that, there are others that are very, very, very important. James says Merino logic was sound, but sometimes replacing players for similar style players doesn't work. But get me Isak as my honorary replacement. Absolutely. Soup says Zubimendi will be the more of the replacement for Xhaka style-wise. I mean, he won't be a replacement for Xhaka specifically. He'll be a replacement for the defensive kind of the six role. And Rice and Zubi combined, of course, with other traits they have will be Xhaka and more. The idea is that midfield has lots of different traits between players. So there you go. Matt says, I think when some fans say the club miss out on their top targets, they actually mean the club miss out on the fan base's top targets. Well, I mean, there are some cases, Matt, where obviously we know Arsenal have bid for players like Mudryk, like Caicedo, like Rafinha, and they've not got those players. So you could argue that they were clearly priorities that we weren't able to sign. Lisandro Martinez, another one. But I know what you mean when you sense other players that we didn't get. Like one of the big misconceptions is obviously around Dusan Vlahovic. He's a huge misconception of fans thinking he was a priority when discussions with Gabriel Jesus' representatives and over a potential move began way before that January window, before all the Vlahovic noise. Arsenal kind of got used quite significantly in getting Juve to pay a massive price to Fiorentina during that window. There was a lot of suggestions that Arsenal had interest in him, and they definitely did have an interest, but despite the fact that there was some kind of unofficial talks, there was always this idea that Juve were going to get him, and he only ever wanted to move, of course, to Juve as well. We're getting into that sphere now where we get names thrown at us: Higuain, Gorkov, Ivan Toney, Benzema. Benzema was like a hilarious window. You've not lived really as an Arsenal fan in a transfer window if you didn't experience the Benzema hype. Good old memes, eh? Good old memes. Anyway, thank you so much as always for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. I'll be back with you, of course, tomorrow morning for another episode looking ahead to, of course, the summer, the rest of the season. We might be looking a little bit more at this Real Madrid fixture coming up as well. Best of luck to those of you that have entered the ballot if you haven't already got your results from that yet. And of course, if you weren't successful in the ballot, make sure that you do everything you can to get into that ticket exchange. If you are struggling with that, make sure you get in contact with the club's box office. I've seen plenty of people suggesting they're having trouble with that. Or the poll, I should check up on that poll, shouldn't I? Yes. So the poll is after 800 plus votes, which is great to see. Thank you so many of you for voting. How many likes have we got on the video? Should I do a quick refresh? I feel like if I do a refresh, it will expose so many of you. 300, less than half of you that have voted haven't liked the video. Incredible. Yes, 49% are saying Sesko, 33% say Isak, still 19%. So in that whole second half of the conversation, Isak went up by 2%. That was it. Benjamin Sesko going down by 2%. That was it. The majority are leaning towards Sesko. it seems. But there you go. James says Trump on a poll doesn't mean it's the right decision. Anyway, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.